I lost my train of thought. I guess this is part number 2 of Day 9 Daily number 383, where we learn to be a better gamer. In part 1, we talked a lot about the current way that PvT feels from the Protoss point of view. Very defensive, closed up, gotta get my Colossus, gotta have my force fields ready to defend, so I can do a huge push in the later game. It's all defensive-minded, and we talked about how Hero is going to start being aggressive-minded. We're going to see some of these attacks in part number 2, and in particular, we're going to see how he begins weaving his way back to normalcy. So we started by just noticing that these were the tip of the iceberg. These are the little hints that there's something interesting to come, where hell, he lost a unit already. His Stalker nearly died. He saw a whole crap ton of Marines, and he's still gearing up to do some aggression. These Stalkers, by being placed so far forward, actually allowed this probe to move forward. Now, I'm actually going to slow this game down to normal and just hit resume. Yeah, Hero's doing this usual sort of fun micro. Isn't that wonderful? When I was back at home base, looking around, what I perceived at this point in time was, oh, Hero is going 3-gate with his expand, and he's trying to get some Colossi up really, really quickly. And he's just going to be defending on 2 bases, you know, using the Colossus to bounce from here to here to here, bouncing between main and expo, and maybe going for a 3rd and just continuing to chill. That is what I perceived him to be doing. So, of course, when I saw these chrono boosts, I thought this is a pretty logical play. Why make the Colossus, which takes a full 75 seconds, when we really just need some gateway units out so we don't suddenly die right away? So I think Hero does a pretty logical defense, a very safe defense. It's going to look like a pretty thin defense. Here are 2 Stalkers from way back home, warping in Zealots and Stalkers. Good stuff, good jazz. And again, notice how in terms of the ball, the Terran still has the ball. He's still the one putting the pressure on. Look at this huge rally that we have here. Terran is doing obvious goody goodness, getting his refineries up, making sure his macro's smooth, continuing to make SCVs, being way ahead in the stream count. There's our Colossus coming out just because we have money, but we don't really want to sacrifice our basic unit production. OGS Hero does a pretty damn brilliant job barely holding on. And there we go, right? He's slowly starting to defend himself. Alright, cool. So, what would you imagine is the next step? Well, let me hit the B button because I don't want anyone getting over eager. Exactly now, when it's clear that the Marines are cleaned up, I want you to think, how would you normally imagine a Terran to proceed? We see our Colossus about to pop out. I was going to assume that he would get range, maybe another Colossus, but probably 1 Colossus and then range. If we just killed off a huge army, we suddenly don't really need range, unless we want to be doing an attack at the front. With this extra swell of money, I'd probably be building probes, and I'd probably be taking a 3rd. That's where my head would be at. And then begin going for some late game stuff. We're going to go to best foe use point of view. What would he be doing? Well, he's going to be turtling up, and he's just going to be trying to get up to drop. So that way he can begin putting more pressure on. Watch what Hero does instead. This just absolutely, completely arouses me. We see a Warp Prism coming out. Oh, and we see Warp Prism speed coming up. Oh, what? Now, isn't that cool? Is that not amazing? Oh, I love that. That is so awesome. Now, we saw an interesting consideration happen right there. You saw 2 Forges go down, and then you saw him nix that plan and get a Twilight Council. I want you to just be a little bit aware of that right now. We're going to come back to it in a moment. In general, the more aggressive somebody is by ground, the longer of time it takes for them to get up any kind of medevacs, right? If we went 5 barracks, well, it looks like our medevacs are going to be quite a bit delayed. So we're going to see Hero immediately pop into action. Now, if we actually just come to the Terran's point of view, Terran in general just feels completely safe. Missile turrets for DTs, defense at the front, another command center. Like, everything feels quite a ways in Terran's court. But this is the sort of move that suddenly you end up making Terran just look and feel way super weak. So super weak. And look at what Hero's doing. He's getting a bunch of gateways, and what he's actually going to do is not really build out of them at all. He's only going to really be warping in from this warp prism, and hey, from this pylon that's going to get planted up here. And in all of this, he's expanding. Now, this is an extremely nice way to deal with the fact that very often your Terran buddy wants to drop you, but he can't. I want you to envision for a moment. First of all, this is just totally kick-ass, right? This is just really sweet. I want you to envision for a moment, what if OGS, or what if the best Faux You didn't get this 5 barracks opening? What if he didn't end up doing that? What if he went just standard 3 racks and rushed really quickly for medevacs? This is something that Hero does so often that I don't know why it like never quite occurs to me until you actually see it. But if you are aggressive with warp prisms, he can't really drop you because all the units need to stay back at home. Let's back up for a little bit. If we look at the unit counting station, we see 15 Marines out on the field right now. In general, if you end up trying to go for really, really fast medevacs, you'll have a couple Marauders, a decent number of Marines. They'll have some upgrades, and if this Colossus comes in, I mean, you think about the amount of food that goes into medevacs. 2 medevacs would carry this whole army of Marines, 8 per medevac. So suddenly, when I'm doing the drop with this Colossus, I am not being dropped by the medevacs. And that is a complete role reversal, an absolute complete role reversal from the usual TVP, which is, oh, medevacs are up, time for me to sit on my ass and keep my Colossus back. We see Hero rarely doing this. He just sprints right into action with these kinds of things, and then the opponent can't really reinforce, can't really focus, can't really defend as well. In the units lost tab, we see the Terran has a little bit more lost, but he's going to have a hell of a lot more lost. I don't really think that this tab means very much. When you devote a lot to harassment, you can't really read too much into this, but this certainly is fun to see Terran just losing a whole bunch of shit and Burnout having 0 effect. Now, I'm going to speed this up, and we're just going to look. Isn't this fun? Isn't all this great? Yep. Moving in with the Warp Prism. Whoopsie daisies, almost losing the Warp Prism. And now here comes a very fancy little harassment. These are the sort of tactics that make people drool, that make people just get not going to say that. Excited, I guess is the appropriate word. But I want to point out something. If we rewind just a little bit, we were looking at all the sexy action, but here's what you're going to miss out on back at home in your desk if you are just watching the game with excitement. So here comes 3 sentries. Here's all the Colossus dropping action on the minimap. I'm going to come over here to the far corner and look at the production tab. Just stare at it with me. Just stare, just look. Now glance down at the minimap. We see there's the Colossus drop action going on. Look back up here. There's Zealot legs, there's gateways, there's a Nexus. Keep looking at it. You know what you're not seeing? Units. You know what you're not seeing? Units. You're not seeing units get built. You're not seeing that. No units are getting built. Holy cow, we're even getting a Templar Archives. Our 3rd expansion still coming. We really haven't missed probes in any of this. We're still not making units, still not making units. Gosh, when are we going to make units? Now we're finally going to make units. This is one of the biggest... Oh, sound wasn't able. This is one of the biggest keys in this entire style that Hero will do. He's going to be really aggressive, but he's going to be very conservative with those warpins. And he's going to do this sort of jump. And of course have absolutely ridiculously phenomenal Colossus control. Still only warping in the main. Still doing a lot of this cool stuff. And then he's just going to sneak past this missile turret like a boss. And all's good. Okay, now we have the medevacs popping out. Per usual, we see the Vikings and all that jazz. Hero is still going totally to aggro town. No units morphed in. None. In the unit counting station. We see, hey, there's the 5 stalkers. There's the 3 sentries. We had a warp in of 6 zealots. And these 6 zealots are the only things that have popped out since that drop came. All the rest were warp ins from the warp prism or nothing at all. With the rest of the money, he's going to be teching up to High Templar. And this is something that, again, is quite smart, right? This is what relates back to this idea of harassment does damage and that's good, but it also distracts from our normal, usual path of things to get done. And the important thing that I want you to think about is with Protoss, hold on, my train of thought's drifting away. I'm going to wait for it to come back. I'm not going to force myself. I'm not going to overstress. I'm just going to let that happen naturally. With Protoss, generally the things that you are missing are the big key things, right? You're generally low on things like Storm or Zealot Legs or 1-1 upgrades or a Colossus. The things that you generally are not low on is basic units like Zealots and Stalkers. I want you to think about how that's different from Terran. Terran is generally low, or generally is trying to get a lot of Marines and Marauders. That's what they're really looking for. That's the juicy stuff. Protoss, their juicy things are these big upgrades, like Storm. So whilst doing this harassment, gets up an expansion, gets Storm, fantastic. Excellent way to buy time was with this Colossus drop. Humorously enough, notice we haven't gotten range for our Colossus at all. What are we warping in? Just Templar. We're not warping in Zealots. We're not warping in any of that jazz. We're not warping in any real large ground army. We got 1 Zealot in there, but the rest was like energy type stuff. We also have, it looks like a forge being constructed up here. Cool. But so far, this is just really massive harassment. And the best foe you, if we actually just look at his minimap, he is having the biggest struggle time dealing with this, right? He just can't seem to move out. And it looks like, oh no, our hero Colossus falls. Second Warp Prism incoming. And now suddenly with all our Warp Prisms, now we're starting, or our Warp Gates, now we're starting to warp in those Zealots. A really cool thing that we see Hero do, but not many other people do, is he'll be building a lot of cannons. I'm going to ignore this for just a little while. Maximum harassment. We bought ourselves a lot of time to get up Templar with Storm. We did that with this Speed Warp Prism and many a Warp Prism. So, now that we have it, how do we buy ourselves more time to get these upgrades up? Interestingly enough, like, these Templar are part of our core army that we want. And look at this. Next warp in, still a shit ton of Templar. That's a lot of Templar on the map. We have 4 with 3 more warping in. Whoa! Absolutely incredible. There's that probe we got sort of offensively positioned. And again, this is the moment where, as Terran, you think, I have medevacs out, it's time to go crazy, it's time to really start stepping into action. Time to harass, but instead, the Protoss player is the one really keeping us occupied. Now that stunk. That is the one thing that you have to be mega, hyper, giga, ultra crazy careful about. However, the idea of continuing to storm drop is really important. Obviously, that's just the shittiest thing ever. Obviously, you don't want that to happen. Raffle, raffle, raffle. But one thing that's actually quite valuable about this robotics facility is that anytime you're suddenly feeling pressure, insta-build a lot of immortals, with especially this composition. And again, Hero just lost his big medevac. Or not his medevac, his big warp prism. Ordinarily, this is when you would go into passive mode. But Liquid Hero again and again and again and again and again and again and again just moves out. He just goes for it. Why can he go for it? In the early game, you can go for it. if your opponent doesn't have that many units and you have fast stalkers and you have these sentries, now you can go for it because you have these Templar. What if he tries to come at you and you need a retreat? Well, you just storm him a little bit more. The upgrades don't quite end up being as important to Liquid Hero as just like adding on more gateways, getting more Templar up. Everything very aggressively positioned for Liquid Hero. And it's so easy to watch a game like this and just look at the battles and see all the cool stuff going on and to not focus on this extremely important aspect of, with this aggressive, harass-heavy style, sure, we're seeing Liquid Hero get to a place, you know, that everyone would say is good. We want to be here. Excellent, good stuff. But he's done this without any pressure from the Terran player. It's not that the Terran player has done damage, or tried to do damage and deflected it. It is instead that the Terran has really been unable to attempt any of that at all. Alright, cool. So we lost one Warp Prism. Try again. Just going to keep going for it. I actually think that was a little overeager. I actually don't ever recommend just sacrificing stuff to do that, or sacrificing medevacs to go in for those sorts of attacks. Hero always seems to have these power units when he has these engagements, these storms that really, again, force Terran to think twice about engaging in any way. But with the force fields, he's able to at least get some kind of retreat up. Obviously, the best foe you does end up breaking through, doing a lot of damage. And I think that that stems from the fact that we sacked 2 full Warp Prisms trying to do damage out here. And that, I think, is the #1 thing that I want to emphasize before the break. We're not going to be going to the break right now, but probably in 2 or 3 minutes we will. Is that if you do end up starting to be over-aggressive, it's important to note that you can actually kill yourself quite easily in those kinds of circumstances. In this case, I do think that Hero is behind in the food count. However, notice that Hero, if you just look, he's quite okay. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that he has so many Templar with Storm. This is what makes Hero a real beast in these late game spots. He just gets a lot of Templar with Storm and cannons up. This is his really genius late game defense. Pylons up everywhere. Just lost a whole bunch of stuff. Keeping observers in the mid. If you're ever in an emergency, make Immortals. More Templar popping out. Extremely aggressive. You know what we haven't seen a lot of? Stalkers. We really haven't seen that big of a Stalker army. We can get there eventually, but Hero literally is just deferring a core army again and again and again and again and again. He's deferring it. Is it time to make a lot of Zealots and Stalkers and base units? No, I want to expand and get upgrades. No, I want to get Storm. No, I want to take another expansion. One of the biggest aspects of this deferral that he keeps doing is these ridiculously early assimilators. Even this expansion had guys in gas really, really early on. I'm actually going to pull back to right when this expansion popped up. We're just going to zoom on ×8 quite quickly. Look at that. Right when the expansion is done, we're getting it up. And that might seem pretty reasonable, like derp, you know, like, well, every expansion should have 2 gas geysers running. Well, if we look at the unit counting station, we still have like hardly any units on the screen at all. We don't really have that many probes. We have 60 probes. And yet we have 1/3 of our probes devoted to mining gas at this phase in the game, right? With those 6 geysers, 6 times 3 is oftentimes 18, which is a frickin' third, you guys. Super ultra gas heavy. So here we go. We've really not seen Hero... Oh, God, do I need to oil this chair. We really haven't seen Hero accumulate a big army at all. And remember how early on you heard me say, ooh, he built 2 forges, but he canceled it and got a Twilight Council instead. And then he got a really fast Templar Archives. I'm more and more thinking that very fast Storm and ridiculous amounts of Templar is absolutely key in this matchup. Not for big engagements. You don't really do the big engagements. You just do a lot of drops. And these are really good defensively and harassedly. And then over time, you'll end up building your big-ass army. So Hero, of course, has his little gas up. A huge amount of cannons. Again, deferring his big armies. Slamming guys in the gas right away. Having these pylons all over the place. Having the early Warp Prism speed. eventually meandering his way towards the big upgrade, big regular army. Look at this defense. Look at this. Expanding, defending, harassing, upgrading. In terms of basic units, a good amount of zealots, maybe 14, not a huge amount, and 3 stalkers, and that's all. Still a lot of warp gates. Why that many warp gates? Well, with our harassing warp prisms, we can always warp in and do a little bit more harassment. Ha 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 ha. And doesn't this probe just look like he's going to build another nexus? Doesn't that just give you the impression that he really wants to build that other nexus? Well, I'll tell you what he does. And he will in a moment. Now we're finally starting to get blink at like the 20-minute mark. Now we're finally starting to get some stalkers up. And now we see Liquid Hero, as he's on the verge of maxing out, finally coming back and starting to get this huge, basic, large army. What has happened is Hero has been aggressive and aggressive and aggressive and aggressive all game long, and the effect has been that the best for you has never really been able to do very much harassment. We haven't really seen any drops. We haven't really seen much of anything else. So we're going to take, again, a little 2-minute break, listen to my amazing music in between, and when we come back, we're going to see the way that Hero finishes it up with his nice little advantage. So don't go anywhere. Come into part number 3 right after this. The only thing that would really stop me from doing part 3 is this arrow I got in my knee. Kind of